Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. My name is Anna Mars. I'm a part of the team that supports all of our COR Advantage users. And I am joined today by my colleague, Holly Delgado, who is an early childhood specialist at HighScope.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you a little bit about data collection this year.
Absolutely. And so really just again, before we get started, want to say thanks again for being here. We know that it's an incredibly busy time. There's a lot of things competing for all of our time and so we're so grateful that you're here. Our goal today is really to provide you with some tips and some suggestions that you can incorporate as you are building out your data collection plan for the 2020 school year. So we know that not every suggestion is going to work for every program because all of you have, unique contexts and unique needs, but our hope is that we can provide a variety of different suggestions that can help get you started as you really are putting those plans together. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. The topic for today is assessment tips for administrators, crafting your data collection plan for the 2020-2021 school year. Our agenda today, we're going to focus on 4 main topics. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about why assessment matters in 2020. Obviously, we have a lot of things that all feel like they need our #1 attention and priority. So why are we spending this time thinking about assessment is absolutely something that we'll start with to frame our conversation. After that, we're going to talk about strategies that you can implement to help set up your teachers for success. So thinking about tips around training and resources you can provide your staff as they are working to collect this data in the 2020 school year. Next, we're going to talk about some technical considerations for those of you that are using COR Advantage specifically. So again, different settings and options that you have and may want to consider as you're setting up your year for the coming school year. And then last, after that, we're going to talk about assessment holistically. So thinking about how you can use the COR Advantage system to really understand what's happening in your program and how you can best support your children and families. And then at the end, of course, we're going to definitely save some time for Q&A so that we can answer all the questions that we're hearing from you. As you can tell, we're definitely covering a lot of information today, but please keep in mind that you don't need to remember it all. You will be receiving a recording of this 24 hours after the conclusion of this event. In addition to that recording, you will also be receiving a certificate of attendance for this event. So again, that's all coming 24 hours after. Just a few other housekeeping things before we fully jump in. So again, if you have questions during the event, please use the Q&A module of your Zoom webinar platform. You can find that at the bottom. There's a little icon and it says Q&A. So type your questions in there. We have a team of folks that are going to be answering questions during the webinar. And then, as I mentioned, we will also be answering questions after the webinar during the open Q&A time as well. After today's event, if you have additional questions or if you're looking for some more individualized support, please reach out to the COR Advantage support team so you can access us at help@coradvantage.com, and we'll be happy to help help as you're thinking about your specific needs and your specific context. And so with that, we really want to start by learning a bit more about why you're here today and sort of what's top of mind for you. So I'm just launching a poll right now, and I would love if everyone could take a second just to answer kind of what your main concerns and considerations are as you're thinking about, child assessment and sort of, what feels challenging to you kind of going into this next school year. So I'm going to leave this open for about 20 or 30 more seconds just to get some answers. Awesome. And if you do select other and you feel like, we didn't accurately capture what you're thinking, we'd love to just hear from you in the chat. Feel free to kind of type in and write out what some of your concerns are. Seeing a pretty even split so far. I'm seeing a lot of folks that are really thinking about how are they going to be able to collect useful data. So we're definitely going to touch on that today. Very excited. Also, some folks that are concerned about the ability to really complete their data collection. So we'll talk on about some suggestions for that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll now, and then we'll be able to look at those results. So a lot of concerns, which is great, and that's why we're here to kind of help partner with you as you're crafting that data collection plan for the year. So thanks so much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Holly to go ahead and frame our conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And just like Anna was saying, and it looked like you all said in the polls as well, we all have a lot of different questions that are kind of going into this upcoming school year. And one that's definitely top of mind for us is thinking about what is going to be that useful data, and how are we going to collect it? Also, there might be something that we can give up in the meantime, right? Where can we balance data collection versus other things that we know that we need to do? We know that teachers this year are being asked to work harder than ever before. I've actually even heard it framed that this year is really going to be equivalent to a first year of teaching, but for all of our teachers at the exact same time, and for you all as administrators as well. We are navigating these unprecedented times together, and we are learning and growing as early childhood professionals together too. In spite of all of that, we are here today to talk about data collection. And with many teachers that I've worked with, we often think about assessment as something that they feel perhaps that they're just required to do. It might be a second thought that comes after the teaching and learning. This year, we will really want to shift that mindset. It's time for us to start thinking about demystifying data for our teachers and really helping them see why that child assessment data is going to be especially important, especially this particular year. So what is that answer? Why is child data collection for this upcoming year, 2020-2021, as important as ever? For many of us, our children have been in quarantine since March. We may not have seen them in person for 6+ months. So there's so much that we don't know about our children who are coming back into our programs. How has quarantine affected them? Did they have the home support or those adult-child interactions that they needed in order to continue on that same trajectory of development in which they left us last year? Did our remote learning strategies that we employed in March and in April do, even through May, right, do what we hoped that they might be able to do in regards to growth and learning? Did a gap in development grow even wider between our children with the highest scores and the lowest scores in certain areas? Also, how has COVID-19 affected our children personally? And how do we then respond to that impact? Baseline data this upcoming school year is going to be key in helping us form an accurate picture of our children. It will help us individualize learning right from the start to tailor the content to support children where they are currently, and then be able to gently scaffold their learning to that next level. The beginning of school year data will help us determine their zone of proximal development right now. So it gives us a place to start. None of us have a crystal ball. And unfortunately, we actually have no idea what stages of the virus we might move through during this 2020-21 school year. Although we may have a school calendar that's already designed, it's most likely going to be our best case scenario. Periods of quarantine from anywhere between 14 days to several weeks could be a very real possibility for us this school year. Additionally, some of us may have moved to a hybrid schedule. We may have already determined that we're starting this school year only seeing children in person for 2 to 3 days a week. For others, you have maybe have actually shortened your daily routine to add some additional time at the end for that sanitization process. Still others may be beginning that school year completely remotely. And for those of us that were lucky enough to have flattened that curve just enough to begin in person 5 days a week, we know that there's also going to be other safety protocols and social distancing measures in place now that haven't been in our classrooms before. So however you are starting this school year, your time with your children will not look the same as it did a year ago. Thus, if we have really limited or different time with our children during this 2020-2021 school year, we need to be extra intentional with how we are using that time. Your individual funding sources might provide for you some information around your program regulations and their requirements surrounding data collection. We also are going to give you some additional ones a little bit later today, but we want you to use these as a guide as you begin to create your own data plan. For our teachers, we need to help them see the data collection process as a way that they can then determine the strengths and those opportunities for growth for each child in their classroom. They need to use that baseline data as well as ongoing data collection throughout the entire school year to truly drive the instruction that's happening in those classrooms. Help teachers learn to interpret their own data and to design lessons that target specific skill development. Individualized lesson planning is going to be a key component of success this school year. As an administrator, looking at your data from a higher level may also be helpful. So of course, using that classroom level data to coach and support your teachers, and then using that program level data to be able to plan some program-wide professional development opportunities. Using data in these ways will help guide your teachers towards success. But what else can you do to set your teachers up for a successful year in regards to data collection and data use? First, we want to make sure that we have clearly defined our purposes of assessment this school year. So what are your expectations in regards to data collection? What are your expectations as an administrator in regards to data usage? If you have a target number of anecdotes or of assessment evidence that you would like your teachers to collect each week, make sure that that number is achievable based on their time spent with children. This number might need to come down from where it's been in previous years. In order to effectively use data, teachers need to have time built into their schedule in order to enter that evidence onto the COR Advantage online platform. And then once it's in the system, they need to know how to analyze that data and how to have time, and they need to have some time to be able to create those meaningful and authentic and individualized lesson plans. We know some programs may only have one lead teacher who's primarily responsible for data collection and for entering and scoring that evidence into COR Advantage. This year, however, because of the need for all of our teachers to truly understand where children are developmentally and to be able to teach within that zone of proximal development, as well as that limited time that we might have together, we are strongly recommending that all teachers in the classroom are trained and able to support assessment data collection. This might also include people that you haven't had as part of the assessment process before. So therapists for our children with disabilities, family engagement specialists, perhaps teachers that are floaters who might be in and out of a variety of classrooms, social workers, anyone else who you know is going to be in your classrooms working with children directly could serve as a support system in data collection. It might also mean that you as the administrator, or if your master teachers happen to be in and out of rooms collecting data, could be part of what they do as well when they're in those classrooms coaching and modeling. So really truly thinking about who do we have going in and out of our classrooms this year, and we recognize that that number may be less than it has been in the past, but how can you best leverage their ability to be able to support with this assessment data collection? In addition to intentionally designing lesson plans that meet the needs of our children, we also will need to support our teachers in intentionally designing a data collection plan that works for them. Thus, when we're creating lessons, we might actually need to note what specific COR Advantage data, So what core categories, what items, and possibly even those indicators they're hoping to collect during a particular lesson or point in time in the daily routine. We may even want to include different materials or ask specific questions or use specific vocabulary in order to gather data more efficiently. Have your teachers think ahead of time about those core advantage items. Have them consider which items could be cross-referenced. In other words, could you plan an activity that might align to more than one core advantage item? For example, if your recall time is going to involve children drawing a picture of what they did during work time, can you make sure that teachers are collecting data for fine motor, for writing, and for art simultaneously? Similarly, if a small group includes patterning, you might also be able to count those number of lily pads, right, that frog had to jump across in order to get to the other side of the pond. So really thinking intentionally and creating a plan to cross-reference our data collection will make that process that much more efficient. You may also want to consider the use of remote data collection techniques. So if children are at home, this may mean that we are going to have some specific asks that we're going to put out of to ask of our family members. So for example, we might be doing something live virtually, or perhaps I've sent home a pre-recorded video of myself as the teacher reading aloud from a book of nursery rhymes. I might also ask the child and the families to take a video of themselves saying those favorite rhymes afterwards. Or I might ask them to make up their own rhyming words and record that. And then when they send them back to us using COR at home, this could connect up to phonological awareness, but maybe it could also connect up to music. Or we might have to ask our families to do things like shape hunts or letter hunts in their homes, still keeping learning active and engaging, right? So we still want to make sure that all of our ingredients of active learning are present, but we know that when we're putting that information out there, we're going to ask parents to return information back to us and connect that then to geometry or to alphabetic knowledge, whatever it might be. We will have some additional tips on remote learning. We actually just hosted a webinar last week that was entitled Supporting Families, Establishing Consistent Routines and Engaging Home Environments. And that did look specifically at some virtual learning ideas. And then additionally, we will have an upcoming webinar that's entitled COR Advantage, Assessment Tips for Teachers, Strategies for Partnering with Families to Collect Data. And that will be coming up on Tuesday, September the 1st. Both the recording and the registration link for that upcoming training opportunity can be found at highscope.org/webinar. Finally, to support teachers in meeting the needs of children who've been in our programs previously, share the data and the anecdotal evidence with them from previous years in easily digestible ways. So this might mean that you want to pull the observations by teacher reports, or you want to filter through that moment screen from previous years. It might make sense to dive into some of this evidence directly with your teachers during coaching sessions in which you're discussing individualizing instruction for specific children, or to really think about what scaffolding strategies make the most sense for children in that particular small group. I'm now going to turn it back over to Anna, who's going to walk you through some of the specific technology options that will be available to you to help your program better form your data plan for the 2020-2021 school year.
Thanks, Holly. I really appreciate the comments about intentionality. I think that's going to be so important this year more than ever, really being intentional about what we're planning and what we're asking. We're going to dive into some of that a little bit and also think about some of the technical considerations that are available to all of you as you're setting up your school year. So first and foremost, we want to remind everyone that as you're doing your planning process, we really encourage you to start with looking at the guidance provided to you by your funding source. So you may have specific requirements that mean that, not all of these suggestions that we have for you will work for you, but we do want to encourage you to kind of start with that guidance and then work from there. So the first thing that we want to encourage you to consider is thinking about your assessment periods. So within the COR Advantage system, you have the ability to set up to 4 assessment periods within a single year. And you're able to determine the specific dates of those assessment periods. And so because of this flexibility, we really encourage you to think about what number and length of those assessment periods is best going to serve you this year. So maybe in the past you've done 3 assessment periods. Is this a year where you want to do fewer, longer assessment periods and do 2 instead? That would give your teachers more days to collect the data within an assessment period. So to alter those dates within the COR Advantage system, you're able to do that in your settings. So you see on the menu over here, I have my settings, and I can click on this. And when I do that, my period settings is the first thing that I'll see right here under my center settings. I can click into this, and then these 3 dots right here are going to allow me to edit those dates. So I can click on that. I can edit the periods, and I can set up the number and the dates of the periods that make the most sense. So again, as you're thinking about your assessment periods, it's going to come back to really what's your purpose for collecting the data, and what are the requirements based on that kind of your funding source and your unique context. So we encourage you to think about your assessment periods as you're getting set up. Another consideration is to think about what content you want to assess. So the COR Advantage assessment, it's a whole child assessment, and we know that it's helping us look at all of the skills that are most important in helping children be prepared for kindergarten and beyond. That said, as Holly was mentioning at the beginning, we know that this is a year of trade-offs. And we know this is a year where we have to make some challenging decisions. So one decision that you can choose to make is thinking about if you want your teachers to be assessing every single category within the assessment. So it's worth noting that the way the tool was validated, if you're selecting all items within a particular category, you're still using the tool in a valid and reliable way. So our encouragement to you is, if you're thinking about this, to start with thinking about which categories are most important for you, and then being sure that you're doing all of the items within that category. Another important suggestion to think about, as Holly was mentioning, is family submitted data. So as we're thinking about our family members and our data sources, one new place or one additional place that we might be collecting data this year is from our family members. And so with this, we really encourage you to join us for the webinar in 2 weeks, where we'll be providing information to teachers about both substantively and technically how they can go about asking families to help with some of this data collection. But as a part of your assessment planning this year, again, as you're being very intentional, we recommend really pre-planning what your asks are going to be in conjunction with your teachers and your families if possible. So thinking about, what is an ask that will be reasonable for your families? You know your families best, and you know what would be reasonable, and you know how to not place an undue burden on them. So thinking about, for example, as Holly was giving some suggestions of at-home learning activities connected to COR Advantage items, do you want to intentionally plan one of those per week and lay out what all of your asks are going to be of families, so that they're sending you kind of one piece of evidence per week back to your teachers, so that can really be incorporated into your data planning and into your data plan. Another suggestion is to think about other ways you can ask for information from families. So for example, do you want your families to fill out something like the ages and stages questionnaire, where you can use that specific documentation as evidence in the COR Advantage system? So again, if your families are involved in any of your plans for the 2020 school year or your reopening plans, we definitely encourage you to talk about this with them so that you feel like, you know, together as a community, you're coming up with a plan that feels manageable. And again, if this is something that you're going to do, if you're going to be involving families in data collection, we really encourage that you're proactive about communicating this out with families. So instead of just kind of, you know, putting the ask out there, really helping to explain from the get-go what you'll be asking for them and why, right? And as we're explaining to them and helping them understand that really you want this data back to help ensure that you can use it to inform your instruction. From a technical standpoint, we do want to highlight that all accounts right now have a tag in them that's a family submitted tag. So as I navigate over to the system, what you'll see is that I have I'll have a tag that shows which documentation has been submitted by families. So I can see that right here in the tag section on my moments page. I can see right down here that I have this family submitted tag. For any documentation that families are submitting in, whether they're doing that through the at-home module or the new family app, when that comes in, all of that documentation will have this tag attached to it. But if your teachers are uploading anything into the system, they can manually add this as well. So just to show you what that process would look like, for example, if a teacher is adding a new observation, maybe they did get a section of that ages and stages questionnaire back. They can take a photo of that and put it into the system, add a note if it's relevant. They can go ahead and select the students that applies to. So in this case, if it applies to Damien, I can select Damien. Then I can go into tags. I can still continue to add my COR Advantage tags as I normally would. So in this case, I would go into my physical development and health, and I would go into gross motor and add that. I could assign the score if I'm ready to do that now as well. But you'll also notice again that I do have this family submitted tag right here. So I can manually add this to my piece of documentation so I know the source of the data that I'm receiving. I can go ahead and save that. And then once I publish that, that will appear on my moments page as well. So once that's published, again, what can be really helpful is that you can have that family submitted tag as something you can filter for, so you can understand what data is coming from where. And this is something your teachers can look at, but it's also something that you as a director would be able to see as well. So we do recommend using this tag if you are collecting data from families. In addition to that, you know, I think it's important just to remember that kind of whichever of these considerations you choose, there will be some implications for your reporting. So for example, if you're choosing only to assess specific categories, that will have an impact on your completion report, which would not show 100% complete. And if you have any questions about any of the other specific reports that might impact, you can always reach out to us at help@coradvantage.com, and we're happy to talk through kind of based on what your specific reporting needs are, what would make the most sense for you. So again, these are some of the more technical considerations that you have within the system as you're thinking about both where that data is going to come from, but then also how you're structuring your year and planning to be able to collect that data. We do want to highlight as well that, you know, I think this is, as we're really kind of all thinking about data collection this year, I think this is an exciting time to really be thinking about what data is the most meaningful to you. What data is going to best prepare you, prepare your teachers to be able to support your families throughout the year. And so we do want to highlight kind of a few additional things to consider. So first and foremost, I think a great place to ground your thinking is to start by what happened this past spring. So, you know, when programs closed or when our model suddenly shifted, was there information that you did not have, but you really wish you had had? Or on the contrary, was there information that you felt like you had and you were so grateful that you had it? It allowed you to better work and support your programs and families. So I think thinking about kind of what information will be helpful as you're going into this uncertain year is a great place to start. For example, one thing we heard from some programs this spring was they felt like all of a sudden they lost contact with some of their families, or they weren't able to reach them, or they were missing out on what was happening at home. And so if that was something that was a challenge for you, or if that's something that resonates with you, we really encourage you to proactively think about how can you mitigate this challenge? Because as Holly said, the year is it's going to be an unpredictable one, and we know we're going to need to be flexible and shift accordingly. So a couple things we wanted to highlight within the system as well is that there are some additional reports within COR Advantage that might be useful to you as you're thinking about what data you want to collect and what data can help support your work with families. So one of those is the sent messages report that you're seeing on the right here. You can find this within the family engagement section of your reports. And this can just be a really helpful report to help set expectations with your staff, but then to be used as an accountability partner as well. So, you know, if, for example, you're setting an expectation about the number of times you want your staff to be communicating with families, whether that is through a phone call, through something they're sending out of the system, through a virtual meeting, like a Zoom meeting, you know, if you're setting those expectations, there are ways that you can track that through the system. So the sent messages report, you can filter this by staff member, you can filter it by date range, you can filter it by communication type. So this can be a really helpful way just to check in and see how your staff are doing with those communication expectations. And then it can also be a really helpful way to diagnose a potential problem before it becomes one, right? So within the sent messages report, you're able to see if folks are opening the communication you're sending. So are you sending something that you notice that your family, you know, one family isn't opening? Or are you sending something and you notice that most of your families are opening one type of communication, but not another type of communication? Looking at this data can help you think about, you know, how are you communicating with your families in an effective way? In addition to that, if you are, you know, creating an ask for your families, one of the other reports just to take a look at within the family engagement section is the family comments report. And if you have questions about that, we're always happy to kind of answer specific questions about that. But if you're sending communication out through COR Advantage and you're asking your families to respond back, that can be a way where you can understand how those efforts are going in your program. One last thing that we wanted to highlight as well is that as you're thinking again about holistically what data is going to help you throughout the year, we encourage you to make use of the tags function within the system. So as I click over and just show you that, again, we know that the COR Advantage items are all in there as tags, but this is also a way that you can add in your own customizable tags. So for example, if you want your teachers to be sending out tutorials, right, or pre-recorded content that they're sending out of the system, you can add a tag into the system and call it something like tutorial or pre-recorded. And you can ask your teachers to attach that to the content so that you as a coach can very easily find that information and find that through the system. And then be able to offer teachers feedback on what you're seeing through that. So we know that this is a time for new thinking, not only in the ways that we're collecting data from children and families, but also in the way that we are supporting our teachers. So just to show you that within the system, You can see this tag section down here on my menu. When I click into this, this is going to bring up all the tags that I have in my account. This plus button right here will allow me to add a new one, either a new folder or a new specific tag. So again, if you wanted to add a virtual tutorial, if you wanted to add, a live virtual meeting tag or something like that, to be able to track either that data source or to track kind of the communication that's going out of the system, you can do that as well. And then again, you can really see all of that on the moments page. So over here, you'll be able to filter again and look at, for example, all of that information that's been connected to that tag. So then you can see this very easily and you can provide feedback and follow up with your teachers appropriately. So really, I think one thing that we want to highlight and encourage you all to consider is thinking about data holistically and thinking about what data is going to support you, right? And as we're using data to really guide a lot of our decision making this year, whether it's decision making with children or our decision making with staff, we really encourage you to kind of spend the time now to think about what data will help with that, and then incorporate some of these suggestions into your specific plan. So I know that was a lot of information, a couple different suggestions for you to consider for sure. We want to kind of take a pause and jump and take some questions that have come in. So some of the ones that I'm going to go ahead and see what has come in. So give me 1 second just to pull those up.
Hi, Anna. Well, while you're pulling, I've actually been looking at a couple of them as well. So I'll go ahead and glance at this one. So I have one right here that says, how have you addressed families that might say, I don't have time for that? Perhaps it's because either they're unable to read what it is that we're sending or because they've been affected by COVID-19. I think specifically during this time, we really do need to think about what it is that we are asking of parents and family members and take an individualized approach to that, just as we would anything else that we are doing with children in our own classroom. So for example, we want to make sure that we are not overwhelming parents, right? So we may have different asks and different things that we are sending out to families at different times. I think one of the beauties of COR Advantage specifically is that we can get photos and videos to come back to us. So if we are able to just say, can you snap a picture of yourself singing a song with children today that might have counting in it, or something that's simple, and especially starting off simple so that we can build parents' trust and belief in that they can actually do this, that our goal is really to partner with our families and to help build and support their understanding of child development.
Definitely. And Holly, I'll just add to that I think, and we'll be talking about this in more depth in 2 weeks, but when we're asking for things from our families, we want to think about, what is going to place the least burden on them. So how can we spend the time being really intentional in our planning so that we're asking families to just give us an insight into something that's naturally occurring at home? I did see one additional question that came in about assessing incorrect data when it comes from families. And so I just wanted to highlight something and explain something technically. So when families are submitting data, it's going to come back with a family submitted tag on it. It is not going to come back with a COR Advantage item or a score on it. So it will still be up to your teachers who have gone through training in how to assign those scores to really go in and add those items and add those scores. So again, that tag is really just to help you understand the source of where you're getting your data from. But we do still want our teachers and our folks that are trained, and I think that speaks to the comments Holly made earlier about being intentional with training this year. But we do really want our teachers that are trained to be the ones that are assigning those scores.
Great, thanks. I also see another question as I'm going through some of them. This one came from Sharnitha Stinson. And she was asking how she might be able to assist teachers to include COR Advantage in their Google Classroom, which is one of their district requirements. And kind of my thought process around that is we know different programs are using different modes or modalities to be able to communicate with families. I actually see Google Classroom as being one of those places where we might be able to, if that's a district requirement, you could potentially put some activities out there for families. You can use the Google Meet as your live virtual. So how you might be able to do some live communication virtually back and forth with the family members, but really thinking about COR Advantage as that assessment component. So pieces of it you may be able to, so activities you could push out through the COR Advantage system, or you could push out through your Google Classroom if that's your requirement of your district. But really kind of trying to find a balance and thinking about COR Advantage as the child assessment. Google Classroom is the platform in which you are facilitating some of those more live virtual or other ways to be able to get some lessons home to families.
Thanks, Holly. Absolutely. And if you're getting communication back from families in a different way that's not through COR Advantage, again, you are always able to manually put that into the system. So you're always able to do that. In addition, I think another question that's come in is what is achievable? You know, like we're struggling to figure that out, and how can we go about figuring out what is achievable if we have a hybrid model? So Holly, do you want to put some thoughts on this? I'm happy to add some of my own as well.
Sure. Yeah. And I think some of that's going to really depend on how much time you are having in your classrooms with your children directly. Again, we want to make sure that we're not overwhelming our family members, and we want to make sure that we're not overwhelming our teachers as well. On a typical day in our demonstration preschool classroom, so at HighScope, in what we used to have just a half-day program, so in about a 3-hour day, I took somewhere between kind of 10 and 20 anecdotal notes throughout a 1-day period, so in that 3-hour time. So just kind of thinking about that, kind of thinking about where you were before is also helpful. When it goes to sending things home for parents, I probably wouldn't ask them to submit anything more than just perhaps one thing per day. Again, we really want to make sure that we're not overwhelming. And as you get to talk with your parents more frequently, you'll find out who are those parents that are wanting more, right, and are able to do more, and perhaps who is that one just a little bit more overwhelming. So finding that balance is going to be key this year.
Definitely. And I was going to say to that as well, I think, you know, one thing that's going to be really important throughout the year with, you know, we're being really intentional with our planning, but don't be afraid to adapt, right? Like, you know, ask your families, ask them, like, is this something that you're able to do? Ask your teachers, have those open dialogues and conversations, and really see them as helpful knowledge bases to really be able to help with this specifically. So that's something that that we encourage you to do. Another question that came in that I saw was slightly different, but about IEP tags. Yes, I do have those in my account. So absolutely, you are able to put IEP goals into the system as custom tags. We work with a lot of programs that do that and actually find that as a way that they can use kind of that one piece of documentation to meet multiple needs. So again, especially this year, as we're trying to think about how one observation can serve multiple different purposes, that can be a way that one observation can support building out the IEP portfolio, as well as in the COR Advantage system as well. If you have any specific questions about sort of how you might go about doing that for your account, or if it would be helpful to talk to someone about that, reach out to us at help@coradvantage.com. We'll be happy to kind of walk you through what that process would look like. But I think that's a great suggestion for thinking about, you know, how we can do more with maybe less data coming into the system this year.
Great. I also see another question. This one came from Teresa Schulenberg. It was about how many recorded activities or live videos should be done with families so as to not overwhelm. I definitely recommend that you go back and watch, if you didn't have an opportunity to join us when we talked specifically last week about supporting families and that virtual learning process. We know that different districts have different requirements around this. I think one of the benefits of some of the pre-recorded things that you can send out through COR Advantage is that families can choose to open those when they have the time to be able to engage with it. So last year at the end of our school year, usually just one a day, sometimes two if there was something happening. But we know that different programs have different requirements around that. One thing that we do want to really make sure that we stress is that we are working with early childhood. And so we want to make sure that we are thinking about those screen time limits. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no more than an hour a day for children who are ages 2 to 5, and even less to no screen time, right, for children that are under the age of 2. So really thinking about how can we shift, what can I do live virtually with children specifically, and what might need to be done as a coaching support for that parent. So how do we shift our mindset, right, if we're not seeing our children regularly, to working partially directly with children, but also more about supporting and coaching those family members.
And just to add on to that too, I think thinking about, and we've seen some questions come in as well about, you know, how are we not giving parents extra work? They're already working from home. It's so much. So I think one thing to keep in mind is, yes, I think those like pre-recorded content so families can fit that into their schedule is important. I would also say as well that I think, you know, it's going to be important to remember who your families are that you're supporting. If all of your families don't have access to Wi-Fi, thinking about like, what can you do to help coach your families, as Holly was saying? Can you pick up the phone? Can you give them a call? What can you, you know, either send, or we heard from, you know, some of our different programs doing things like drop-offs, right? Where they're, you know, dropping off some goodie bags, or you know, as families are coming to collect meals, they have some little kits there too. So really thinking creatively about what is your context, who are your families, and how can you best support them given who you are working with is definitely something we encourage.
Yeah, along those same lines, there's also someone who asked, how do we use COR Advantage specifically with preschool children that maybe don't have a computer or don't have Wi-Fi, or for those families that don't speak English? Anna, do you want to go into a little bit about some of those pieces and the functionality within the COR Advantage system?
Definitely. So one thing I'll say in terms of if families don't speak English, if you're writing messages within the system, there is a translation capability within the system. So if you're writing out messages and you're sending those out in that way, that can be a way to help you communicate with your families so that you're getting that information out to them. So that's definitely one thing that we recommend. Another thing that I'll say as well, I think, again, it's sort of getting back to the, you know, how can I do this if I don't have live events with my families? We definitely encourage you to tune into our webinar in 2 weeks. We're going to be talking about that specifically. So how can you have conversations with families where you're asking the right questions and you're asking questions that are getting you information in a way that's still authentic and still really gives you that insight that you need. And I think, again, being intentional with both the activities that we send, but also the questions that we're asking is going to be so important. So we're absolutely going to be talking about that in 2 weeks on September 1st. So we really encourage you to join us for that. And we'll be kind of looking at the COR Advantage system technically, but then also providing some examples from different teachers and different ways that they've done that.
Great. Yeah, I do see a couple others that have some concerns specifically about that authentic data. So Anna, like you were just mentioning as well, I think another thing that comes into actually receiving that authentic data is really going to make sure that our families understand all of those components of active learning And then also, what does it look like? How do I engage with my child? What should my adult child interactions look like? So I think, again, kind of going back to some of that coaching support that we can provide to our families will help make that data that's coming back to us more authentic. And then also, as always, that video and or those photographs, I think, will help with that piece as well.
Definitely. Yep. And we'll be, again, as Holly mentioned, we'll be sharing more about that and kind of giving some additional suggestions for that. I think, Holly, one sort of follow-up question, I know one thing you had touched on earlier was thinking about making sure as we're building out our schedules that we're giving teachers time. And one question that came in, and I'm not sure if we have an absolute for this, but one question that came in is sort of like, how much time do we need to be giving teachers to put that data in, to be analyzing that data, to be making sense of that? So wanted to see if you had some recommendations for that as well.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that is really going to depend on how your program is structured, right? So what time do you have? I know in our demonstration preschool, when our teachers get together to do their lesson planning, so we plan on a daily basis. So when they get together to do some lesson planning, they are also able to enter in their data at the same time. So one teacher is kind of reading and working on the COR Advantage system. The other is filling out the lesson plan. So they're kind of doing that simultaneously. I think at the beginning, we may need to offer a little bit more time, especially as we're getting new things that are coming in from families and we're really looking at it. And then after we get into kind of a system, it may be able, we may be able to kind of do it in a little bit more efficient of a process. I would say if you have the ability to be able to give teachers at least a half an hour per day, perhaps an hour or two, if you even have some more time throughout the week, that would be great. But that's always something that's going to be important. I know some teachers also, if you do have that nap time built in, will spend time during that period of time during their school day as well. So they're still in the classroom, but they're not directly engaged with children at that moment in time.
Great. And I do see that there were some questions that came in, some technical questions that came in as I'm looking through this about kind of using the at-home module. So just want to encourage folks to check out the help page. There's a lot of resources out there, both around, using the at-home module with your family so that they can submit that documentation in. Also around the family app, if that's something that you want to be rolling out with your families, that's called Kambu for Families. You'll be able to find that. We have a lot of resources about that both to help you understand it and understand how it works, but also resources that you can just give immediately to your families. So that's something that you can absolutely do as well. So I encourage you to check out the help page for that, as well as to reach out to us at help@coradvantage.com if you have specific questions. And I should mention as well that the family app and kind of getting that documentation from families, again, we're going to walk through that in 2 weeks. So there is definitely more to come on that. And we really, really hope that you can join us for that. So with that, I just want to go ahead. It looks like we've gotten kind of all the questions that have come in. So I want to just share a couple additional things for you that are kind of coming up as additional resources for you. So again, there are a bunch of upcoming webinars that and roundtables that we invite you to join us for tomorrow. Equity in Early Childhood Education, Navigating Race and Equity with Young Children. This is a follow-up roundtable to the one that happened a few weeks ago. We're going to hear from the same folks and we're really excited about that one. And then as well, the webinar on September 1st that we've definitely talked about, that will be coming up with a lot of tips for teachers. And then the next webinar the week after that will be building relationships with children and families from a distance. So really thinking about, as we have new children that we're working with this year, and we're kind of in new and different circumstances, what can we do to build those partnerships? So for all of those, you can register at highscope.org/webinar.